After praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and continuing our journey in a series of khutbah, looking at good moral values and characteristics and behavior, and the full embodiment or the best of characteristics and behavior is none other than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described him or mentioned about him, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ, for you indeed to emulate and to copy and to look at the characteristics of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the best example for a person to follow inside their life. Thus we find that externally and internally you find total perfection in his characteristics, in his behavior and the traits of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Thus we find that these traits which are displayed to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam externally show a concept of peacefulness, of contentment, and internally as well. And that is the theme of today's khutbah, about peacefulness, about being in a state of peacefulness with the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with al-Islam. And thus if we look at the seerah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and we see the embodiment of a total submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or display of this submission via miracles bestowed upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what is known as dalail al-nubuwah, signs or evidence of prophethood. Imam al-Bayhaqi, in a famous collection, 8 volumes handwritten, 4 volumes printed contemporary at the moment that we find, speaks about all of the miracles that he could collect and find about the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Likewise, we find mu'jizat al-Nabi, Ibn Kathir, miracles of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam by Ibn Kathir, which actually is encompassed in this encyclopedia of Al-Bidayah wal-Nihaya, the beginning and the end, a book of history of the Islamic world, or a book of history before the beginning and the end. And then there we find a chapter dedicated to the miracles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These miracles, it becomes incumbent upon us to read about his life, read about his seerah, to understand how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed so many وَكَانَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكَ عَظِيمًا, the virtue and the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alayka, al-khitab lil-nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, virtues upon you, blessings upon you, so many that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has delivered and bestowed upon the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Amongst these mu'jizat that we find, just to get us into the right mindset to understand the concept of the emphasis of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, we find amongst these miracles that were given to him is a splitting of the moon, whereby they're asked to show a sign. And as we find that even inside the Quran, Surah Al-Qamar begins by speaking about, indeed the hours come close and the moon has been cleft asunder, totally split in half, that there was a gap in between them. And even today scientifically it's been proven that there is a crack in the middle of the moon. Anyhow, that we find before this scientific discovery that we find, this was a mu'jiza given to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We find other miracles that ulama have documented and collected. You find that on many occasions, with a lack of qillatul ma, lack of water, a need of water, and expeditions in jihad, in journeys that we find, that the companions complained of a lack of water, or there wasn't much water. And at times the Prophet would take just small trinkets of water, place his blessed fingers inside it, and begin to rub his fingers, and water begin to gush out. These were living miracles that were described, or living embodiment that the companions began to see. Likewise we find the weeping of the mimbar that we find. The Prophet ﷺ, when he used to, before the mimbar was built for him, before some of the companions suggested, should we build a mimbar for you? He would lean against a palm tree and deliver the daily or the weekly sermon from that. And when the mimbar was built, the palm tree began to weep, sobbing like a small child. Hadith inside Bukhari, would begin to sob. And the Prophet ﷺ climbed down and went to the tree and comforted it, hugged the tree. These are all miracles of the Prophet ﷺ. Food would speak to him ﷺ. You find likewise the animal or the sheep that was poisoned, that is described, mentioned to the Prophet ﷺ that this sheep has been poisoned. These are just some of the miracles that we find, displaying the miracles or the embodiment of the prophethood of the Prophet ﷺ, that it becomes incumbent upon us to begin to study, to understand. As for today's hadith that we find, in this hadith that we find, the Prophet ﷺ لما قدم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إلى المدينة انجفل الناس إليه. You find that people, when he came to Medina, people came around him. So you find when the Prophet ﷺ came in front of these individuals, this individual, Abdullah ibn Salam, he narrates that when I saw him, the Prophet ﷺ, عرفت أن وجهه ليس بوجه كذاب. When I looked at the blessed face of the Prophet ﷺ, I knew that this is not the face of a liar. وَكَانَ أَوْلُ شَيْءٍ تَكَلَّمَ بِهِ. And the first thing that he spoke to the people of Medina, the first address that he gave to the people of Medina, أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ أَفْشُوا السَّلَامِ. O mankind, spread peace, spread the salam. وَأَطْعِمُوا الطَّعَامِ. Feed the poor individuals. وَصَلُّوا وَالنَّاسُ نِيَامٍ تَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةَ بِسَلَامٍ. Feed the people when in dire need. Offer the night prayer, supererogatory prayer in the night whilst people are sleeping, and you will enter into the Jannah in a total state of submission and peace. Hadith in the Sunan of Imam Tirmidhi. Naqif araftu anna wajhu laysa biwajhi kadhabin. As soon as this companion saw the Prophet ﷺ, he recognized this is not the face of a lying individual. And just as we began with the traits of the Prophet ﷺ, Al-Amin was Sadiq, known as a truthful and an honest individual, even before Ba'tha, before prophethood that we find. And thus we find that these other miracles of the Prophet ﷺ, external characteristics that led people to recognize the Prophet ﷺ, began to recognize this is an individual who's a selected and a special individual that we find. Everything about the Prophet ﷺ is unique. Hatta you find his beauty, the beauty of the Prophet ﷺ that we find. Numerous narrations that exist speak about companions looking at the full moon, then looking at the face of the Prophet ﷺ, and then concluding that the face of the Prophet ﷺ outshines the moon. He's more beautiful than the moon that we see on the 13th and the 14th and 15th of every single month. That was the Prophet ﷺ. His skin was as soft as dibag, soft as silk. Any person who shook his hand felt the warmth of his hand, smelled the perfume of his body, the odor that we find. A very strange hadith that some of us may have never heard, inside hadith in Sahih Muslim that we find. Read the chapter Fada'ilun Nabi wa Fada'ilul Anbiya, the virtue of the Prophet ﷺ, virtue of all of the prophets. Inside this collection, inside Sahih Muslim that we find, speaking about the characteristics, the traits of the Prophet ﷺ, you find even the sweat of the Prophet ﷺ, shay'un ajib. He would go and he would rest in the house of Sulaym. He would go and rest there, and he would sweat profusely. Then when he would leave the house, some narration mentioned that she found the sweat, and she began to collect the sweat and put it inside small bottles. Hadith inside Sahih Muslim. And that sweat was the best smell of any musk that existed on the face of this earth. فَلَمَّا إِسْتَيْقَظَ الرَّسُولُ عَلَيْهِ الصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ. When he woke up, he said, Ya Sulaym, what are you doing? She said, I'm gathering your sweat. Because in there, barakah li-sibyan, for the children, is going to be barakah inside this sweat. This is the sweat of a normal human being. It has an odor. Has, maybe you can use a foul stench that no individual wants that odor to come out of their body. But the odor of the Prophet ﷺ was sweet smelling musk. Nothing ever smells sweeter than that. Was the sweat of the Prophet ﷺ. These are all signs of the Prophet ﷺ being a specific individual, that when you meet him, you find that no individual ever met him except for they loved him. They adored him. Hatta al-a'da, even the enemies, even in their rage, in their hatred, they still had this inclination within their own self. When they spoke privately, they would disclose amongst themselves that he's from amongst us. We know that he's not a liar. But the only reason we don't want to mention this to the public is people then begin to turn away. For what purpose? Turn away from their commodity, turn away from their transactions. Deen, religion at the time was control of Kaaba, control of the idols, control of the statues. It was a form of wealth, of earning. Whoever controlled the Kaaba, controlled the world. Because people would flock, thousands would flock to go and offer their services to these statues and idols, leave behind the wealth. That's why مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى. We don't actually worship these idols. Even modern form idolatry, even some of them they conclude we don't actually worship them. But they are a way to get to the Creator, to get to the one Almighty God. But what leaves behind, what remains, the wealth, the property, the sacrifice, the gold, the jewelry, goes to who? It goes to the monks, it goes to the priests, it goes to the people who control that environment. So if they begin to speak out about this wealth, speak out, or begin to acknowledge that this is the Prophet ﷺ, they begin to lose that commodity, begin to lose the control upon the people. And thus we find it's partially true that religion is a concept of controlling people. But Islam is a way of life, of bettering people. That's the difference between Islam and these other adyan that we find. They're all based upon controlling mankind. And thus we find that Christianity is split away, or mainstream people split away from Christianity because their priests were controlling people, were hoarding their wealth, hoarding their mind, hoarding their property. And it's quite sad, but it should be highlighted, that to a certain degree that you find even in Islam, there are people who begin to hoard Islam, begin to control Islam, think they have a dominant role, that Islam is something that belongs to them. And Islam is hur, is a free way of life. And Islam, qawlullahi wa qawlu rasul, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the way of the Quran, is the way of the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. It doesn't belong to any entity, any ideology, any government, any regime, any people, any form of clerics. There's no form of clericalism that we find that exists in other religions, that the clerics control the religion, that they dictate to the people what the religion is. Clerics are there to just flourish to people, to help them to understand the religion, to better them, not to manipulate and to control people, to become people who control the masses around them. And if people begin to derail away from their statements, then they become heretics, they become rebels, they become people who are rebelling against them. There is no rebellion. It is the teachings of the Quran, the Sunnah, encourage the person to become obedient towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thus we find Ayyuhan nas, first commandment of the Prophet entering into Medina. Ayyuhan nas, even he's not even in this hadith, we can understand, not even speaking to the Muslims. Al-khitab li jami' nas, everybody around. Afshu salam. Either we can take it technically, afshu salam bima'na giving the salam, at-tahiyya, whoever you meet. Sallim ala man ta'rif, man lam ta'rif. Give salam to whoever you know or you don't know. You know, many of us, we fail to understand Islam because it's control of manipulation. Islam says give salam to whoever you don't know and you don't know. Islam doesn't say that if you don't know the person, or the person doesn't fall into your mindset, don't give them salam, don't greet them. Islam is generic. Give salam to whom you know and you don't know. Rather, amongst the minor signs of the Day of Judgment, or be salam only to the people that you know, people that you want to know, people you want to associate with. These are amongst the minor signs of judgment. That you only give salam to the person that you like, that the person you want to give to. Every single Muslim by default is a Muslim. Aslu annahu Muslim. Every single Muslim by default is a Muslim. There has to be clear parameters they've breached. It has to be apparent inside society. This individual has left the fold of Islam. Other than that, the rest of every single individual, every time you meet them, afshu salam, give the salam to them. Because this salam is a form of greeting, letting this individual know that you are at peace, you are at rest. I will not harm you, and I don't expect any harm from you to fall upon me. And that's the other meaning of salam that we find. To all of humanity around there, spread Islam to the people. We've entered into Medina. Our prime role now, after leaving Mecca, performing the hijrah, coming to Medina, is afshu salam. Give greetings to the people. Call them to Islam. Tad'uhum ila al-Islam. Remind them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's this world which is lacking peace at the moment that we find. It's a very rare virtue. Peace is a very rare virtue that we can seek upon this earth at the moment. We find all sorts of unrest that we find. Insecurity, violence, oppression, injustice, and we should not hesitate to say wars upon the face of this earth. Al-Islam, in ma'ani of Islam, al-Islam, as-silm, peace, security, total devotion, total commitment. Islam is not perpetual warfare, as some minor elements of Muslims may begin to preach, and more openly that the non-Muslims begin to preach, that Islam is just a religion, a way of life of jihad, of al-harb, al-tadmir, of fisk, of terrorism, of violence, of bloodshedding. This is the biggest fallacy on the face of this earth. Because read through statistical data that we find, the greatest tyrannical warfare, oppression on the face of this earth, terrorism, has been committed by non-Muslims, has been committed by Christians, the Crusaders. Not just a few years, centuries. Centuries of warfare, of spilling blood. Centuries of spilling blood. Read through history that we find, blood up to knees. That you find animals could ride through the blood, what they've done. As-Sulibiyin, Crusaders, what they've done to the Muslims and everybody around them. Anybody who never wanted to enter into Christianity, their cause of Christianity was slain, was tortured, was punished. Read through the Spanish Inquisition, 1492. What do we find there? Spilling of blood of humanity. Then they dare to say to us that we Muslims are full of warfare. Read through World War I, World War II. Not just a few million, 20 to 30 million people beyond that have been killed. And today, it stands a testimony today. War after war, slaying and killing and looting, plundering, displacement, harmship, led by who? Great so-called superpowers of the world, led by Muslims. Are Muslims out there on a pillage, on a carnage of destroying this earth? And Islam is not full of perpetual war. Al-Jihad exists there for a certain moment of time. At certain moments that you find a person needs to go, defend their honor, their land, their property, to spread the parameters of Islam. It's certain locations that we find. Hadith inside Bukhari, Kitabul Jihad. لا تتمنوا لقاء عدوكم. If the Prophet was full of rage, full of bloodshed, full of displacing of people, before he met any individual, he conveyed to subjects around him, لا تتمنوا لقاء عدوكم. Never ever aspire to meet the enemy. Kitabul Jihad, Sahih Bukhari. Don't ever aspire to meet the enemy. Don't ever aspire to do that inside your life. Because we know the repercussions of warfare. We know what's going to take place. But if you have to, you have no choice. Then remain steadfast. So the life of the Prophet is not full of perpetual war. It's full of perpetual peace. That's what it's full of, always finding ways of peace. Finding ways of not trying to displace people, come to agreement, to abstain from warfare, trying to protect people's honor, dignity, of showering gifts, showering presents, showering all forms of wealth and commodities to entice people, entice the non-Muslims, to stay away from warfare, to stay away from carnage and pillage. This is what Islam is, that these people have failed to understand. And likewise we find that wishing and wanting for peace, that we find that some of these individuals, they wish for peace, they wish for a good life. You know, the strange thing is about these individuals, these non-Muslims that we find, at the moment the highest standard of living, the best life that we find, they all have it. Read through the Scandinavian countries, read through the historical data that we find. They have the best living life, they have the best ornaments of the world, but yet you find the highest rates of suicide committed inside the Scandinavian countries. Why? Limadha? Why? What is missing inside their lives? All forms of worldly possessions, all forms of worldly beauty, everything has been given to them. But we find what is lacking is inner peace. The inner peace is lacking inside their lives because somebody hasn't afshu salam. No one has made the effort to spread peace to them, to spread the teaching of Islam towards them. And likewise we find that if it's not taking their lives, these people begin to drown themselves, whether it be in the world of music or sports or movies that we find, wealth, power, positions. They drown themselves, that inside that they try to find this inner element of peace, that somewhere in that journey I'll eventually find contentment inside their life. And the strange thing is, they never find contentment. They never find that contentment. Because until a person doesn't submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there will be no peace. There will be no contentment. وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا وَنَحْشُرُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَعْمَى. Whoever turns away from the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for that individual will be a restricted life. Danka. Ulama have described dank two ways. Amma ad-dank fil qabr, that all of us will face restriction inside the grave, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of us. And the other linguistic meaning, ala dunya, ad-diq wal haraj, restrictedness, never ever happy with yourself, never happy with your life, never happy, content with the world, with the pleasures, never content. That is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whoever turns away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never find peace. No matter how much they may claim that they possess this and they own that, the inner vacuum within themselves is empty. And that can only be filled with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Find it with Islam. Find it with the Creator. How does one find it with the Creator? Afshu salam. Spread peace, spread Islam. وَأَطْعِمُ الطَّعَامِ. Islam isn't a personal relationship. Islam lays out certain things we need to do inside our life to gain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أَطْعِمُ الطَّعَامِ. Feed the poor individuals. إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا. Inside Surah Al-Insan that we find, إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. We feed you for the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا. We want no thanks, no gratitude from you. Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah, في تفسير هذه الآية يقول, he mentions about this ayah, if any individual wants some element of praise, or even a poor person says to them, thank you, they have not fulfilled this verse. Real fulfillment of this verse is لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا, total sin. They don't know who you are. They don't know you've given this charity, they've given this wealth. Because some of us by human nature, we like praise, we like good words said to us. So even when a person gives charity, a person wants to be remembered. This is a person who done this well. This is a person who helped me. Total submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that person you've given the wealth and the property to, they don't even know who you are. They don't know who you are. And they supplicate for you in absence. That is the best element of sadaqah, of charity. That no one ever discovers who is the person who delivered this charity, gave this charity. Totally seeking their reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And likewise then we find a personal relationship. Because we find there are people out there who are generous to people, who help people. But maybe some people do it for the sake of mankind, to be known. Their placard is displayed, their name is displayed. So a person needs to build a personal relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm not saying that we shouldn't give wealth, we shouldn't have placards, we shouldn't have this. I'm saying at the same time be vigilant. وَصَلُّوا وَالنَّاسُ نِيًّا. In secrecy, observe obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Pray whilst people are sleeping. When people are resting, have that moment, personal moment inside your life. Either during the daytime, to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Either before Fajr or after Fajr. Reading some Quran, making adhkar, in solitude, in peace, on your own. Remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Qiyamul Layl. To strengthen your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are ways the ulama mention of ikhlas, of sincerity. So a person doesn't just become doing things for the world, doing things to show to mankind. وَصَلُّوا وَالنَّاسُ نِيَّامٌ تَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةَ بِسَلَامٍ. You do these actions, you will enter in total peace into paradise. وَاللَّهُ يَدْعُو إِلَى دَارِ السَّلَامِ. وَاللَّهُ يَدْعُو إِلَى دَارِ السَّلَامِ. شَيْءٌ عَجِيبٌ. Allah calls you to Dar as-Salam. As-Salam min asma' al-Jannah. Allah calls you to Jannah, calls you to peace, calls you to contentment. Allah is calling out, telling people, come, this is the path to paradise. These are the actions you need to do and you'll enter into paradise. وَمَنْ أَصْدَقُ مِنَ اللَّهِ حَدِيثًا وَمَنْ أَصْدَقُ مِنَ اللَّهِ قِيلًا. Is there anyone more truthful than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in speech and statement? Allah has promised, you do these actions, تَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةَ بِسَلَامٍ. You will enter into paradise in total peace and submission. And this is something we need to encourage inside our lives. وَيَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. And Allah guides whomever He wants to the straight path. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after this, continuing this ayat inside Surah Yunus mentioned, لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا الْحُسْنَى وَزِيَادَةٌ. You know when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about Jannah, speaks about promise, continues the journey. Doesn't just mention the bare basics that some of us Muslims we think, you know, I just do the basic element, I'll go to Jannah. I just pray 5 times a day, that's me done with. I'll get to Jannah. I pray Jummah, I'll make it to Jannah. Read the Quran in detail. Quran doesn't say just do the basics. Quran says go the extra amount. لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا الْحُسْنَى. Those who excel in goodness. They excel in goodness in everything inside their life. For these individuals, there will be al-husna wa ziyadatun. There will be something extra given to these individuals. What is something extra that will be given to these individuals? Hadith inside Sahih Muslim. Ziyadatun fussira another ila wajhi Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The extra thing given to these people inside paradise will be seeing the sublime face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذي الجلال والإكرام. Everything will perish on this earth except for the sublime face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Person who's been worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be given a good ending. Will be given an ending. That's we find that when people ridicule Islam. What do they say? Allah forbid us from using such words, but linguistically what they say, what is this worship that you do every single day, this bowing down, this prostrating 5 times a day? What does it give you in life? What does it give you inside your life? Nothing changes inside your life. You're still a downtrodden individual, you possess nothing, you have nothing inside your life. You're wasting your time. They're praying 5 times a day. But this person has contentment inside their life, peace inside their life. And likewise knows that in the akhirah was ziyadatun, that these years of my ibadah, of my worship, of my devotion, my commitment will be the ultimate success. The ultimate success of what? Of meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
The ultimate success of seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وُجُوهُ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ. On that day, faces will be radiant, will be glowing, seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And other faces, there'll be a veil, there'll be a barrier. They'll not get to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People who disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and stayed away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's Allah promised inside this word. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَتَطْمَئِنُّ قُلُوبٌ بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. Those people who believe and they find tranquility indeed in the remembrance of Allah. Do hearts find tranquility? أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. Hearts find peace inside that. And likewise, making that dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives peace inside your life. Peace, qana'a, fi qulubikum, fi sudurikum, fi uqulikum, wa fi budunikum, fi abdanikum, fi ajsamikum. The dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you peace, gives you contentment. وَلَا ذِكْرُ اللَّهِ أَكْبَرُ وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ مَا تَصْنَعُونَ. The dhikr of Allah is the greatest thing. The greatest dhikr, as ulama tafasir have mentioned, is as-salah. The greatest thing is as-salah. Gives the strength to the individual, gives them spirituality, awakens their soul, brings them contentment, brings them peace. Halawa lis-salati. The sweetness of the salah, ma tajid fi ay shay al-ard. You will never find a face on this earth. Halawatu salah qad kutiba fil jannah. Halawatu salah, sweetness of prayer, was it written on this earth? Was it described on this earth? Sweetness of prayer was written in Jannah. Allah, when the Prophet travelled to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, gifted him with, gave him 50 salawat, gave him 50 prayers, and it brought down to 5. Each prayer 10 rewards. Gifted the Prophet with as-salah fil Jannah. Li'ay qasd, for what purpose? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want to lift the Prophet up to the heavens? Why didn't he reveal to him on the earth, on the dunya? Aqimus salah, establish the prayer, carry out this ritual like the rest of the rituals. But to show that the greatest link between an abd wa Rabb, the greatest relationship between the servant and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is as-salah. فَمَنْ تَرَكَهَا فَقَدْ كَفَرَ. Whoever leaves as-salah has disbelieved. الْأَحْدُ الَّذِي بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَهُمْ as-salah. فَمَنْ تَرَكَهَا فَقَدْ كَفَرَ. The covenant, this distinction between you and a non-Muslim. What is the distinction? And lips, clothing, food, drink, language. These are all other elements. Asasu shay as-salah. Is as-salah. The salah distinguishes you. لما تأتي وقت الصلاة تقوم وتصلي. Time for salah comes, you stand and you pray. تعلن للناس. Let people know. And the Muslim. You're Muslim, you pray 5 times a day. These are the rituals, these are practices that you do. Don't cave in your belief. Don't hide your belief. Don't conceal your belief that this is something which could be something weird, something strange. La. هؤلاء يعرفون الصلاة. These individuals, they know what as-salah is. They know what the prayer is. They know what the impact of the prayer is. That's why obstacles are placed inside this dunya to derail people away from as-salah. That's the Prophet came with the opposite, or encouraged the opposite. Don't get derailed with the dunya. Hadith inside Sahih Muslim. Whoever leaves Salatul Asr, shaghalatu amwaluhu, his wealth, at-tijara, his children, they disturb Al-Asr is as if they've lost all their children, their wealth, their business and everything. وإمام نووي في شرح هذا الحديث يقول أن وقت العصر is a very limited time. It's a time that many people get so busy inside this dunya, with work, with family, it passes by. Maybe at the end they pray or after Maghrib they pray. So that's why it's stern warning. Whoever misses Salatul Asr lost all their wealth, lost all their tijara, lost all their family members. Likewise we find inside the hereafter. If this is the dunya, the peace that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give to these individuals. Ya ayyatuha an-nafsul mutma'inna irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya fadkhuli fi jannati wadkhuli jannati fadkhuli fi ibadi wadkhuli jannati. In the end of Surah Al-Fajr that we find, Ya ayyatuha an-nafsul mutma'inna, O soul at total peace, contentment. This is when the soul is leaving this dunya. Total contentment. A person who worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has no worries inside their life, has no trouble inside their life. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to this soul al-mutma'inna, soul at total peace, contentment in the creed and belief towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya. Return back to your Lord in a total state of happiness, contentment. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions fadkhuli fi ibadi, enter amongst my servants. Wadkhuli jannati, enter into my paradise. the paradise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
We find that the total source of peace is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And indeed amongst the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is As-Salam. That we find that after As-Salah that we find Allahumma anta as-salam wa minka as-salam tabarakta ya dhal jalali wal ikram. That after making istighfar 3 times, the person makes this supplication, Allahumma anta as-salam wa minka as-salam. That you are the source of peace, you are peace, and from you comes the peace. So after completing this prayer, or being in a state of peace and submission, the person is asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala firstly, al-istighfar, that any discrepancies or straying away of the mind, the body and the soul and commitment towards Allah and to pardon and to forgive the individual. And then recognizing that source of peace, inner peace, strength is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as we find that we should nakif huna, about after as-salah that we find, making such supplications that we find, just as we began with, that we find that the source of peace, the encouragement of peace, that one reason why we don't find that Islam is not possibly spreading inside that society, more than 2,000 masajid that we have inside the United Kingdom at the moment. A great role, there's no doubt, that these masajid play in creating an environment, making an environment wholesome for people to come and offer their prayers. But something should be beyond that. That we have more than 2,000 masajid inside this country. What is the impact? Maybe some of us, we came to this country, may Allah forbid me for using this expression, but thinking this was the Medina. This was the Medina, this is the old home. This is our home, this is our environment. If we do take that understanding, then if you believe that, then look what the Prophet ﷺ done in Medina. What was his impact when he came into Medina? What was his impact with the people around him? Am al-Wufud, the year of delegations entering into Islam, more than 10,000. After being such few individuals, we find 10,000 individuals entered into Islam. Seeing the beauty of Islam, seeing the teaching of Islam. If we have more than 2,000 masajid, what effort are we exerting ourselves? Or rather we find, unfortunately, we find a cultural perception. The Islam that we deliver to the masses is a cultural perception, a cultural understanding. That this is what my teachers do, this is what my elders done. We don't disrespect elders or teachers. We don't disrespect any individual. But as we began with, Islam is a global message. Islam is not there for a culture or for people or certain identity. Islam is there to spread, to be delivered. The more authenticity of Islam, you see the more people are attracted towards authenticity. The more that we have these cultural practices, the more it at times, may Allah forbid, derails people, keeps people content, keeps them happy that this is just maybe a cultural practice, what these people do. We need to deliver authenticity to the people. And that's what I find there's so many practices that we do, that sometimes we find it's a cultural practice, a cultural understanding. We don't want to go against the status quo. The Prophet ﷺ is the ideal role model. He's a role model for everything that we do inside our lives. Nothing is hidden about his life. Even his personal life is documented. There's no individual that their personal life has been documented to such a close degree. But yet you find that his wife speak about his personal life, his personal engagement, the way he conducted himself, to do what? To teach this Muslim ummah. So when we pray, we do certain actions that we find, we follow the embodiment of the Prophet ﷺ. Hadith in Bukhari, Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. Pray, have you seen me pray? The Prophet ﷺ, when he completed his prayer, he made this supplication, Allahumma anta as-salam wa minka as-salam. We don't find, and not to look down upon any individual, we don't find a congregational supplication made by the Prophet ﷺ. Books of hadith are clear. You don't find a single hadith. You don't find a single hadith that the Prophet ﷺ, he gathered the people around after as-salah. Yes, he mentioned in general, ad-du'a ba'da as-salah, al-mafruda, is encouraged, person should do that. But you don't find specifically him saying, or him specifically raising his hand, and the whole of the congregation behind him is saying Ameen or responding to that. Nothing is hidden from us. It's not an exaggeration. There's books of hadith that exist there. Person can read through them and try to see and to discover. Just such narrations exist. And likewise, we find so many practices of the Prophet ﷺ that we don't want to enter into a world of fiqh that we find. But we find what is known as ta'assub. Ta'assub lil madhahib. Ta'assub for what a person follows, what a person being brought up inside their life. This, as Imam Suyuti speaks about, has made a form of stagnation as Muslim ummah. To such a degree, read the Islamic empire. Maybe some of us have never come across this historically. You find that around the Kaaba there's 4 stations of prayer. Not 1 station of prayer, 4 stations of prayer. إِذَا كُنْتَ تُقَلِّدْ Imam Abu Hanifa رحمة الله عليه. If you follow the fiqh of Imam Abu Hanifa, you'd follow the Imam. So when the time of prayer came,
you'd follow the Imam who followed the Hanafi fiqh. And you would follow Shafi'i or Maliki or Hanbali. Then you follow your respective Imam. هذا عند الحرم. A few centuries ago, 4 stations of prayer that every person followed their own Imam when the time of prayer came. We've not been told to follow these Imams, and we're not told to dismantle these Imams. Neither the truth lies between the truth. The essence is to find the closest proximity to the life of the Prophet ﷺ. That's what we've been told to do. النبي أولى بالمؤمنين من أنفسهم. The Prophet has been told, it mentioned that he's closer than our own self. This is what we search for. Person not trying to dismantle works of fiqh, works of madahib, or challenging ulama that we find. That's not what Islam is about. It's about flourishing Islam, encouraging people, simple actions that we find. We find always ta'wilat, ba'da ta'wilat that we find. Raful yadayn fi salah that we find. People cling onto narrations which are weak, or narrations that exist in other books of ahadith. We find 70 sahaba, 70 companions narrating about the Prophet ﷺ that he performed Raful Yadayn fi Salah. Al-Hadith fil Bukhari. ماذا يؤولون? Tafsir of these ahadith, what do they say about them? That maybe an idols underneath his armpit. So he performed Raful Yadayn, so it would drop out. This was a practice that existed before, then it was nullified. 70 companions narrate this hadith. We're not saying people should now go and do this. We're trying to help people to understand that the mindset of people has been gone into a cultural dimension of not looking at textual evidences, not looking at the hadith, not looking at teachings of the Quran, saying this is what the Prophet encouraged to do inside his life, what encouraged people to do. And likewise, we find a message of coming over the minds that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the true source of peace. And we ask Allah to instill this peace inside our lives that we find. That what is the message that we're delivering at the moment to humanity? We should be exerting ourselves. That these 2,000 odd or so masajid that we find, if one individual changes their life, comes in a state of peace and contentment, one individual a month, that's at least 2,000 people a month. And if each masjid focuses upon giving da'wah to a non-Muslim, ala aqal, that's 2,000 people a month, at least. But what's our efforts? That as we bicker amongst our own selves, as we squabble amongst our own selves, we fail to see the wider message. The wider community around us begins to do what? Box us in more and more, place more hardships and difficulties amongst us. The intelligent individual is the one who sees Afshu Salam, spread peace. The Prophet ﷺ was the most wisest, most intelligent individual face of this earth. And that's why when he gave da'wah, he was unique in what he done. Because he made from people amongst their own selves, people from within the Quraysh who accepted Islam, people within the Quraysh who became receptive, people within the Quraysh who became responsive towards Islam, people within the Quraysh who became defensive of Islam. That's what Islam is. That's what an intelligent individual is. An intelligent individual doesn't box Islam in. The intelligent individual is the one who uses the mindset of the people. If they don't enter into Islam, then they become individuals who do what? They speak for the defense of Islam. They speak about the honesty of Islam. They highlight these are the teachings of Islam. But because we've fallen short inside our own life, so some people don't speak out and they don't highlight this is what Islam is. If we begin to display the peace of Islam, we see the strength of that. ادخلوا يا أيها الذين آمنوا ادخلوا في السلم كافة ولا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان. Enter into Islam in total submission to the best of your ability. The greatest blessing upon all of us. Before that we find inna dina inda Allah Islam. The way of life in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Islam. There's no mixing of Islam with modernism, with all forms of isms, with the modern world. That Islam needs to be appealing to the modern world. It needs to be presentable to the modern world. There's certain things that Islam may change slightly, and certain things that may change just to help the people. But core elements of Islam don't change. We don't dismantle Islam and say we're living now in the 21st century. The 21st century is no different from the 6th century. It's no difference. People at that time had a mindset. They had a life. They had an understanding of life. They had their culture. They had their practices. The Prophet didn't change that. He presented this is what Islam is. This is what the teachings of Islam are. Just because we live in the 21st century, what gives us the right now to say that Islam conforms in the modern world? Conformity of Islam with modernism. That Islam is modern in its aspect. Islam is traditional. Islam is orthodox. Islam is spirituality. Islam is a rigid system which is for the betterment of the individual, for the success that we find. And likewise, we find the greatest blessing inside Surah Al-A'raf that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions upon all of us, that we should rejoice in. Alhamdulillah, alladhi hadana lihada, wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. Praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided us to this. The ultimate success is Al-Islam. Praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided us to Islam. That we should be thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, holding fast to Islam. Praising and thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give us al-istiqamah, steadfastness, devotion, commitment. Make us live as Muslims, die as Muslims, be resurrected as Muslims, be amongst the Muslims, be with the leader of the Muslims. That's what we should be rejoicing in. But yet we find that amongst our own community, people drifting away. People going away from Islam, or people having their own understanding of Islam. And likewise the wider community as well.